3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Lower volume. Original work by Tangqi Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, rockharlequin, Lily, JoannaKuang. Part 3 Arania. Chapter 4. As dawn broke next day, Fengju sat in bed contemplating life's affairs. Thanks to Sumoy, who had knocked her unconscious, she was able to stay with Prince Qing on the same boat last night. She heard Prince Qing had slithered fruitlessly around her all night long. Only early next morning, when the pheasants began their crows, did he retire inside the cabin in fatigue. Fengju was glad and worried at the same time. She was glad she didn't have to face Prince Qing today. This was a very, very good thing. But would she have to let Sumoy strike her again come nighttime? No matter how skillful Sumoy was, she'd still spend the entire night in unconsciousness, then suffer dizziness and neck pain the next day. Over time, this wouldn't be a sound solution. Her maid Cha-Cha also looked as pensive as she did. She, too, was glad and worried at the same time. She was happy because these days Her Highness was increasingly gaining royal affection. Last night, the king had commanded His Excellency's eyes to pay a bit more attention to Her Highness. At last Her Highness's hard days were ending. But she became worried when His Excellency's eyes did not follow the royal order and accompany Her Highness back last night. Could it be that she had left the door ajar ever too slightly? Then, should she simply not close the door tonight and only lower the curtains? But wind was cold on the river. What if Her Highness caught the cold air? While servant and master were both lost in their own thoughts, outside came a message that after half an hour of sleep, remembering he was to have breakfast with her, Prince Qing had forced himself to rouse from his nap and was now waiting outside. Fengju sighed inwardly that Prince Qing must be the incarnation of the devil. She instantly slapped on a concerned expression and told the servants, "How can half an hour of sleep be enough? He's been up all night. Surely he doesn't have the strength. He needs to stay in bed much longer. Every one of you should coax him to sleep. If he is exhausted, ultimately, I as his sister will be very pained." "It's been 2 days since you have seen Prince Qing," Cha-Cha replied with some surprise. "Normally your Highness will accompany Prince Qing and let him lie at your feet to sleep. How come today?" Fengju's heart gave a thump. Cha-Cha suddenly went hushed. On her face appeared an odd hint of blush, then at length she shyly said, Do you perhaps want to look for His Excellency's eyes today, therefore you don't want Prince Qing, whom you've always loved, to disturb you?" Her face continued to flush as she curled her hands into fists. "His Excellency's eyes is your husband. If we compare him to Prince Qing, naturally there is some difference." She thought of something and said with a slight embarrassment, "Are you coming to His Excellency's eyes' chamber this instant to have breakfast with him?" "Ah, of course we cannot delay such a matter." "How stupid of me, only now do I understand your intention. I even asked such stupid questions." "Your Highness, rest assured. Cha-Cha will notify His Excellency's eyes right away." The moment she finished speaking, she sprinted off as fast as a hare. Fengju hadn't uttered no when Cha-Cha had already disappeared without a trace. Fengju sat still for a while, then wordlessly brought back her hand, which was raised to stop Cha-Cha from leaving. That was fine. The lesser of two evils, Prince Qing's clutch or Zai's clutch. Even if she were to use her toes to think, Zei's would still come out as the better choice. In the past, her aunt had suffered due to a little snake. At this point, she felt that sooner or later she would also suffer because of this blasted Prince Qing. Those from King Kaihu were really not compatible with snakes. Because they were on a ship, Lord Zei's chamber was not very spacious. A wall screen depicting a flock of jackdaws playing on water separated the room. Fengju idly pushed the door open when she saw Junyo and Changdi already seated around a mahogany table, demurely eating porridge. Zai sat a few feet away fiddling with an incense burner. The sudden movement of the door made a loud sound, but Zai did not bother lifting his head. The corner of Changdi's mouth bent up as she looked to Fengju tauntingly while Junyo demurely carried on with her porridge. Fengju arched her brow. Even supposing Junyo was sick and Zai needed to constantly watch after her, it was Zai who should come to Junyo's quarters. This act by the two sisters did not care at all to avoid stirring up suspicion. They were even more carefree than herself. Fengju had to give them her heartfelt admiration. Seeing that Zai took no notice of Fengju, Changdi felt immense satisfaction. She was convinced Fengju must be embarrassed this time and surely would not stay around for half a moment more. Feeling pleased, the smile on her face deepened. But in a second, however, that same smile froze stiff. Changdi had really underestimated Fengju's face thickness. Already having solid foundation, while she was at Fanyan Valley, she had picked up everything from watching and listening to Donghua Daijun. Nowadays, although her skin was still far from being impenetrable to a blade, coping with this sort of situation was mere child's play. As if no one was there, she went to look for a seat herself, and as if no one was there, she helped herself to the food. Henceforth, they all sat eating the same light porridge, one spoonful after another, tasteless and flavorless. Nevertheless, Fengju, who was sitting next to them, ate deliciously without any quandary. She looked as though she was enjoying her meal entirely too much. Changdi was puzzled. Aranya had so incessantly pestered Zai and seemed to be truly love-struck with him. But so early in the morning she was already ignored by Zai. Why hadn't she shown any grievances? Why was there not any objection? Why was there not any resentment? Why was there no apparent injury on her part? On the other hand, Aranya had always been great at acting. Perhaps she was just forcing a smile. If so, she should instigate her a bit. Changdi completed her train of thoughts and sneered, "I heard Aranya Jija came to have breakfast with His Excellency's eyes. If you are done, it's best that you leave, lest there be disturbance during His Excellency's treatment for Junyo Jija." Fengju took a book from her sleeve and replied, "That's fine. You all go on with your treatment. I'll just do some light reading. You don't have to be courteous for fear of disturbing me. I'm nothing if not generous." Changdi's vein popped blue. How shameless! Who's afraid of disturbing you? Junyo softly coughed and cut in, "Don't be disrespectful." Then she turned to Fengju and said, "Mimi must not know, I've been lightheaded recently. Ordinarily, of course I'd be very happy to see you come visit. But if the room is so crowded these days." She spoke to Fengju, but her gaze seemed to pass over Zai's. "Really, if Jija is suffering such a malady, it seems you should hurry back to your room to lie in rest," Fengju replied in ardent concern. Your cabin is far from here, give me a moment to send 2 servants to escort you back. As she finished, she made a movement to rise. Junyo was flabbergasted. Changdi bit her lip angrily and turned to Zai's. Look at her. Mimi, Fengju modestly began, do you want to praise me for my thoughtfulness? How courteous and respectful of you. Changdi's unspoken ruthless words choked back into the pit of her stomach. If she said anything at this time it meant she did not understand propriety. But if she didn't say anything, how could she swallow down that tone? As her mind turned, she placed her hand to support Junyo who was beside her and panicked. Junyo Jija, what is wrong? The pair of sisters' minds really worked in sync. Junyo raised her hand to her temple and replied, all of a sudden, I feel dizzy, a song well sung. This was called a compassion play, a play which was designed specifically to draw sympathy from others. Fengju recognized it because whenever she got into trouble as a child, she had always loved to act this play. From the time she was little till now, she couldn't tell how many times she had performed this show. She lamented inwardly at Junyo and Changdi's poor acting, but with this mere act they actually made Zai's place the incense burner down and take the several paces it required to come over. He helped support Junyo, his hand placed on hers to check her pulse, his eyes seemed to pass over her stomach. There was some difficulty in this development. From the expression of Aranya's convenient husband, Junyo indeed seemed to be important to him. Whether he was diagnosing anything, this Zai Shenjun would probably want to chase his guest away. Fengju sighed inwardly. Heavens, if Prince Qing was sleeping, of course she wouldn't have to stay here at all, but Prince Qing wasn't sleeping. Once she walked out those doors, she would be surrounded by servants who would urge her to spend time with Prince Qing. She perspired cold sweat. If she were to faint at this moment, she might be able to continue staying in Zai's room. Fengju did not faint, because at that moment Cha-Cha had timely knocked on the door. Cha-Cha assumed Fengju adored Prince Qing and she thus should always promptly relay his latest situation to her. Prince Qing is asleep, very soundly at that. Your Highness needn't worry. Zai's, who was checking Junyo, actually looked up this time. He inattentively said to Fengju, can you? But the word "you" hadn't landed on the ground when Fengju had jumped with a huge grin on her face. Look at my memory, I had forgotten all about catching river breeze with Mo Xiao this morning. Since you guys can't catch river breeze, please stay and rest well. Goodbye, goodbye. I'll come back to impose on your hospitality when I have time. At the door, she poked her head back in and sincerely smiled toward Junyo. Take care, sister. Treat your illness and take your medicine on time for a speedy recovery. Junyo's face momentarily turned blue. Zai's remained still for a spell. Then he turned to Changdi and told her, as if he was now finishing what he was saying earlier to Fengju, can you help me bring the packet of medicine powder by the doorway? The ship was large, but to look for Sumoy, there were only 2 places. Either he was lying in his room, or at the bow of the ship. Fengju went to the bow to look for Sumoy. Greeting her eyes were a red mud stove, an emerald green celadone tea set, and Mo Xiao who was pouring tea. He looked at her with a soft smile. After awakening from a spring slumber, I find the books mundane. My new joy is drinking bitter tea in leisure by the veranda. The young miss hath thus hied hither, shall I pour thee a cup? Fengju finally understood why Mo Xiao was known as one of the most romantic men in the land. Was this not a charming image? Fortunately, her cultivation was solid and her reaction was a mere twitch of the eyelids. But how could any ordinary woman say no when she was offered tea by such a charismatic gentleman? Both were tea lovers, yet one could see Donghua Daijun and Su Moi were entirely different. If the person brewing tea was Daijun, apart from his elegant form, his speech wouldn't contain the same charm found in Mo Xiao's words. Daijun generally only had 3 words to say, drink or not. Fengju smiled softly. At that moment she became lost. Truthfully, she hadn't thought much of Donghua Daijun lately. At the time, she was busy stealing the saha fruit. Then both she and the fruit fell into this world. She wondered what happened to Daijun and Jihan afterward. Perhaps they had solved their entanglement and were now inseparable. As Jihan once said, they were to last eternally. Fengju breathed warmth into her hands. There were times when she still thought of Daijun, but he belonged to a different past. There was no need to bother forgetting him. Henceforth, Donghua Daijun had become nothing more than 4 words to her. I was only joking with you, Su Moi said as he offered her a seat. What, have I brought up some sorrow? Surprised, Fengju replied, I'm still so young, what sorrow can I possibly have? Unable to hold back on her curiosity, she leaned into Su Moi and asked, the words you used to invite me for tea, did you also speak that way to Aranya? Su Moi softly furrowed his brow. Again, Fengju did not restrain herself and dug deeper into the past. And how did Aranya respond to you? There was a subtle tremor in Su Moi's tea-pouring hand. A smiling young girl seemed to emerge before his eyes. She winked to him, then suddenly waved over the dancers nearby. Teacher is inviting everyone for tea. Sisters, why haven't you come over yet? She then stepped to the side. Next thing he knew, he was trapped on his seat by layers and layers of dancers, having no way to flee. Su Moi stopped pouring tea and smiled charmingly, why should I tell you? Fengju straightened herself and looked glum, fine then. Twisting to and fro for a while, she said, the truth is, I came to find you for your help. You helped knock me out last night, but we can't do that every night. I heard. The ship will dock this evening. There is a place with great scenery and I want to go see it. But if Ah Ching comes along, it won't be fun anymore. I have figured out a solution on my way here. Give it a listen. Su Moi replied with sympathy, you sure are trying hard and making your life difficult in order to avoid Prince Ching. To come up with this solution, Fengju really had put in great effort. Prince Ching's eyesight wasn't great. To find her, he always used his nose. In the evening, the dragon ship would dock by Heartbreak Mountain. Heartbreak Mountain had a heartbreak cliff. At the bottom of the cliff was Mingzi Bay. Fengju wanted to visit Mingzi Bay tonight to see Yueling flowers. Although she had considered sprinkling some powder onto her body to escape from Prince Ching, with Prince Ching's temper, he would be furious once he failed to find her. At that time, he may very well swallow the whole dragon boat. She deliberated back and forth. To find someone who would wear her skirt and take on her scent was the best alternative. And yet at the thought of the mighty Prince Ching, she couldn't bear to be cruel no matter who it was. But heaven did not disappoint. While she was caught up in her distress, Tangqi timely appeared in front of her. Fengju said to Sumoy, "From what I see, Tangqi seems to harbor secret feelings for Zai's. Tonight I will leave her a letter in Zai's name and invite her to meet by the river. Mo Xiao, your physique doesn't differ too greatly from Zai's. If you pretend to be him, it should be a cinch." She paused, then carefully added, "When we go on shore, make a pit a few steps away and draw water in from the river, then cover it up with a spell. When Tangqi comes running toward you, she'll surely fall into it. I'll be on a small boat conveniently docked nearby. I'll prepare some clothes. You scoop her from the water, then lead her into the boat and let her change out of her wet clothes. Once you accomplish these things, you are considered my great benefactor. I'll take you to see Yueling flowers." Sumoy watched as Fengju dipped her finger into the tea and drew for him topographic maps in all seriousness. He laughed in spite of himself. "Your little uncle had always said, as the only grandchild in King Kaiyu, you are much too pampered. With that disposition of the devil, you go around making all sorts of trouble. I didn't believe him before, but now I see, you do indeed live up to your name." Fengju erupted, "Little uncle relies on little uncle-in-law's backing, he's the one who goes around making all sorts of trouble. Talk about me with no shame." She looked aggrieved. "Actually, each time my aunt and I stirred trouble, we always gave careful consideration beforehand. Miserably," she added, "these days auntie has uncle-in-law's backing, so she's relatively relaxed, but I still have much to think about." Sumoy choked on his tea and exclaimed, "That could be considered a good habit." Then he stroked his eyebrows and continued, "This plan of yours sounds great in theory, but since you're pulling Lord Zai's into it," his expression became inscrutable. "Zai's isn't an easy person to contrive. If he finds out you're using him, I'm afraid there will be more problems." Fengju thoughtfully considered this for quite a while, then quite a while more, and precisely offered 3 words, "Like I care." 02. As eventide approached, with a mask perched on her head, Fengju squatted within the riverside reeds and peeked to the situation outside through bright keen eyes. The scene was flanked by Heartbreak Mountain in a narrow calm gorge. Innumerable wishing lanterns belonging to the mountaineers swarmed the bay. They dotted across the sky like celestial stars. Tonight coincided with the villagers' Jade Maiden Festival. This festival was a matchmaking event between men and women, an eternal age-old custom of the locale. On the night of the festival, both unmarried young men and women wore masked costumes to go out. Where the grass was quiet and the flowers were still, they used songs and dances to confess their feelings, forming the start of a lifelong marriage. Because they were holding such a major event, it was rumored Heartbreak Mountain would be sealed off tonight. Fengju fiddled with the mask on her head and quietly chuckled. Luckily she had brought a mask by intuition, else penetrating into the mountains wouldn't be a breeze. A gust of wind blew through the river marsh. Fengju sneezed and took a handkerchief from her sleeve to wipe her runny nose. She looked up to see the water pit she had made in the afternoon just ahead of her. Sumoy, who was playing the role of the purple-robed Zais, was now slowly taking his place. "When the moon rises atop the willow trees, after sunset is when I shall meet thee." Forthwith, a blue-robed maiden appeared. She unhurriedly lifted her solace and sauntered forward, but just before reaching the covered pit, she ceased her steps. Amid the light emitted from the mountaineers' lanterns and torches, her ardent gaze directed at Sumoy. Fengju clenched her fists and chanted silently, "Another step, just one more." The blue-robed Changdi stopped and went no further. Shy with uncertainty, she demurely issued a heartfelt protest. "Your Excellency had sent me a letter, and I've read it. In the letter you said you have admired me for a course of time now, that you often have sleepless nights and thoughts of me." Fengju saw Sumoy's body jerking slightly in the night wind. Changdi shyly looked up. "Your Excellency also said it is complicated during the day when there are people around. Since you could not look at me properly, you invited me here to relieve your longing, but you feared such thing would be presumptuous." Fengju saw Sumoy's body jerking slightly yet again in the night wind. With gentle eyes, Changdi softly huffed, "Well, here I am, but why are you only looking at me without saying a thing? You're staring at me like this really embarrasses me." Fengju saw Sumoy's body jerking yet again as he took a step back. Fengju anxiously cheered him on in her head, "Mo Xiao, stay strong." Changdi looked straight to Sumoy, then gracefully smiled to him with bewitching eyes. "You actually don't have to worry that such action would be rash. My feelings for you are also." She could not help herself and took one step forward. "Ah!" Changdi fell into the water pit. Fengju was momentarily stunned. When she could react again, she wiped her sweating forehead as she saw Sumoy also frozen in front of the water pit. She quickly jumped out from the reeds and gestured to him that the fish had been caught. Although there was some surprise, he needed to take the next step and dive in to save her. Sumoy saw her gesture, hesitated for a moment, and then turned his flute into a 20-foot-long pole to poke around the pit. From the pit came Changdi's aggrieved voice, "Your Excellency, you're jabbing on my head." Sumoy hastily slowed his pokes and replied, "Oh, sorry, why don't you climb up this pole? Why were you walking so carelessly? I'll bring you some clothes." Squatting, Fengju saw through the reeds a soaking wet Changdi climbing out from Sumoy's flute, sobbing as she followed him to the dock's small boat. There was some problems, but this matter was halfway to success. Only, Mo Xiao had become a bit unstable after his undertaking. Were the words she left for Changdi in the letter too passionate? So passionate even the amorous Mo Xiao couldn't bear them? Tomorrow if Zeiss found out she had used his name to write such a love letter to Changdi, she wondered whether he would be able to stand it. Fengju let out a long sigh. Her sigh had only left when she heard someone's voice beside her, "What are you doing here?" Fengju turned around to look, and happily smiled when she saw him. "Waiting for you, of course. Didn't I say I'll take you to go see Yueling flowers after we finish?" She gazed to the small boat afar. "You're so quick. It's only just and you've already come back from bringing Changdi away." Then looking back at him, she said, "Why are you still in Zeiss' appearance? Change back, there is no one else here." 2 steps out from the reeds, she came back to take a cypress wood mask and reached out towards Zeiss' handsome face. "I almost forgot. If we're going into the mountains to see Yueling flowers, we must wear this. I've also prepared one for you. Since you don't know the way, stick close to me." Then she pat his shoulder. "Right, if a strange girl sings to you, remember these 8 words, put on your guard, stabilize your immortal foundation." And if a strange guy wants to abduct me, remember these other 8 words, don't be polite, whack him to the ground. This path before us has countless beasts and obstacles awaiting, so we will need to help each other out. Cough cough, of course, it's mainly you helping me out. Sumoy throated a reply. Fengju tilted her head. Why is it that your voice sounds so much like Zai's? Didn't I tell you to change back already? Looking to the sky, she continued, never mind, it's not early anymore, we should make haste or else we will miss it. Deeper into the mountains, sunlight gradually died out, the spring night was without stars. Fengju resorted to an illuminating pearl to light the road. Handsome bamboos and clever plants lined their way. Fengju discovered this excellent spot known as Mingzi Bay from an archaic book she found in the palace. Included in the book was also a detailed map. At this moment, Fengju was carrying this map in her hand to navigate the way. Heartbreak Mountain was celebrating tonight, but the old man under the moon did not comply with appropriate scenery. The sky was as dark as a big black dome looming over their heads. His honor was instead hiding behind the dome, even his mustache was hidden away. Fengju had to stagger along the entire path. The deeper they went into the mountains, the more solitude it became. Occasionally they could hear the roars of tigers. Fengju felt it was a wise decision to drag Sumoy along with her on this trip. The pretty singing voices faded behind them. When they reached Mingzi Bay, their eyes were greeted with a pitch-black landscape, and their ears with dead silence. It was vastly different compared to the bustling town at the onset. Fengju stored the illuminating pearl back into her sleeve, lay down onto the night-dewed grass, and called Sumoy over to lie down with her. Slow sounds were heard a few steps away, and she reckoned Mo Xiao had listened to her suggestion. Mo Xiao was somber tonight. Fengju at first assumed it was caused by Changdi's recitation of the love letter. On the way here she heard a song wafting out from the woods. She caught the first couplet and the last. Together they formed 4 lines as follow: we became husband and wife when we plaited our hair. Doubt never entered our affair. If I live, I'll come back to thee, but if I die, go on remembering me. When the pretty song drifted into her ears, as if a light was suddenly lit, she only now realized. Who was Mo Xiao? For someone who didn't bat an eyelash at the millions of flowers surrounding him, would he be stunned speechless by a slightly outrageous love letter? Mo Xiao wasn't speaking because during this good hour on this beautiful night, he was reminded of the past with Aranya after seeing these couples pairing off. He thus felt pained and did not talk. Leaving Mo Xiao alone in somberness wasn't something a good friend would do, therefore she needed to find topics as soon as possible to turn his attention from all this gloom. Within the darkness, Fengju cleared her throat and broke the silence. It's written in books that Yuelings won't flower until the end of the dog hour, 9 p.m. We may have to wait a little more. There's a folk song about Yuelings. Have you ever heard of it? As she told him this, she tapped her hand and softly sang, Yueling flower, once a snowflake up high. Plucked down, it withered and died. It lived but a moment, perished in the next. When the moon rose, it missed the flower. When the flower bloomed, it missed the moon. The moon was ignorant of the flower. The flower was ignorant of the moon. Flower lived a fleeting life, flower died a fleeting death. Fengju was lazy in her youth. She did poorly in all her main subjects, causing Bai Ji Daijun much headaches. But she was gifted in singing and dancing. When she was little she would love to show off. It was only later when she read from her aunt's books saying dancing for others was an act by entertainers that she stopped. She didn't hesitate to turn into an entertainer tonight to console Sumoy. For friends, she was willing to do anything. Fengju felt she was quite generous, quite righteous. It was a very sad song, and Fengju had expressed the sentiments well, but Sumoy after listening to her only said lightly, "Your singing isn't bad." He said nothing more afterwards. Mo Xiao was being a little strange tonight. But because he was this way, she needed to be there for him even more. Fengju gazed into the shadows and continued to say, "For me, flowers and plants aren't that interesting, but I wanted to read up on these Yueling flowers. You probably don't know this, in myths, Yueling flowers only bloom on Jade Maiden Festival. When the flowers bloom, we can't see the moonlight, so it is always moonless at this time of year. In fact, compared to Yueling flowers and the moon, Una Arania was on the tip of her tongue when Fengju quickly stopped herself. Mo Xiao was feeling sad, the cause of which was Arania. From her experience, she best not mention Arania's name in these times. She thought wisely and used the word she to improvise. It's already good enough that you have memories with her. Take a look at the Yueling flower, supposedly it also wants to see the moonlight once. But when the moon rises it doesn't see the flower. When the flower blooms it doesn't see the moon. They never get to meet, a love which is not destined to be. Is this not a tragic tale?" A long time passed but Sumoy was quiet, still. As Fengju was about to speak again, her words dissolved away when her eyes widened at the sight of bright light slowly rising in the air. The effulgent radiance gradually surrounded the landscape. A stream wound around a vast field of flowers. Amid Yueling trees, tiny petals clustered into blossoms, issuing a dim white light. They left the boughs and drifted across the sky, as though they had been dyed by a layer of moonlight and frost. The stretch of flowers resembled a small patch of sky, with petals floating mid-air like a brilliant stretch of stellar cloud. So this was the blooming of Yueling flowers. How beautiful it was! Fengju had never seen such exquisiteness in King Kaiyu, nor had she on Zhukongtian. Fengju excitedly turned her head to look at Sumoy. Mo Xiao was resting his head on his hand, still absolutely, categorically somber. She could not help but sigh inwardly. For the experienced Casanova to hurt to this extent, even after 200 years he still hurt so much, Arania must have been a talented person. Fengju could not bear to see this despondent, silent, and lonely Mo Xiao. She inched closer and pointed to the snow-like Yueling flowers gliding in the air, determined to comfort him. "Take a look, why are Yueling flowers so beautiful when they bloom? It is because there is nothing else around tonight, and they are the only ones glowing brightly in the open. They're the only ones that we can see, that's why they are the prettiest." She turned to look at Sumoy's masked face and sincerely advised, "For so many years you had no way of forgetting her because you would let nothing else besides her into your memory. When you try to erase everything else, she becomes clearer and her image deeply ingrained, and she will hurt you even more." She gestured seriously, "But this isn't right. Besides her there are other people, other things, other this and that." Sometimes we hold on to our insistence because we are blind. Mo Xiao, it isn't that you don't know this. You just don't want to. At this point, if a sensible man like Mo Xiao still couldn't get it, then she had done her duty and there was nothing more she could do. Unexpectedly, Mo Xiao opened his mouth to speak. Yueling flowers took turn to bloom and wane like a flickering stream of light. Under this stream, Mo Xiao coolly said, "What's wrong with keeping only one person in my memory? What's so special about other people that I should pay attention to them?" Fengju had to admire Mo Xiao for being able to say this in only a few words. But pity arose in the midst of her admiration, and she could not help but soften down. Your steadfast dedication is really rare, but letting her into your heart will also lead pain into it. Mo Xiao interrupted her, his tone vaguely inscrutable. When was I pained? Fengju reckoned Mo Xiao was a dead duck with a stubborn bill he could not bear for others to see his vulnerability, so she agreed with him. I know this isn't ordinary pain, but a sweet pain. I get it, I do. But this sweet pain will break your heart. You must not turn a blind eye, because this sort of pain is fatal once it pervades you. Mo Xiao broke her off. I don't think you really know. Gosh, as a man, just admit to your pain. Fengju frowned. She was suddenly reminded if she wanted to comfort someone, she needed to be gentle. She eased her eyebrows and softened her voice. Being this way means you are in denial. If you're not hurt, then why are you so strangely quiet tonight? Mo Xiao glanced at her once, then turned his back and said nothing more. Fengju's heart thumped loudly. Don't say because she saw through his buried feelings with only one sweep of the eyes, he was rendered so embarrassed he got mad? Mo Xiao could also be very petty. Well, since he was already mad at her, there was no need for her to speak gingerly anymore. She temporarily put aside her mission of enlightenment. Nevertheless, there was something she was really curious about. She had heard numerous stories about Aranya, but she still didn't know how Aranya was truly like. Why not take advantage of his anger and trick him a little? Fengju appeared natural and spoke in a casual tone. You said you only want to keep one person in your memory. How was she like? Night was quiet, a song drifted in from the distant hills, indistinct and faint. When Mo Xiao finally spoke, his voice was low, but she could hear the sincerity. Very beautiful, he told her. And she'll be even more beautiful when she grows up. He paused, then added, she has a good personality too. Then he recalled, also very talented. Talented in everything. And finally concluded, everything about her is wonderful. Then, as though he was speaking to himself, since I picked her, naturally everything about her is wonderful. Fengju mulled over Mo Xiao's words. A pretty face, a good personality, with talents to boot. No wonder Aranya was ill-fated from the very start. There was an old saying, heaven is jealous of remarkable women. These women had always been buried away by heaven, one could hardly lament. Fortunately she and her aunt, although fairly beautiful in looks, did not have a particularly good personality nor any talent. However, she doubly appreciated Mo Xiao's words and wanted to concur with him but didn't know exactly what to say. She thusly said, there was also someone I once liked. I seem to have the impression that he was very good looking, but I think he might have been an awful person. Then she added, that's why he will get to live a long life. Mo Xiao echoed absently, with me here, she will also get to live a very long life. Feng Zhu sighed inwardly. Although she did not detect from Mo Xiao's voice any trace of bitter regret, one cannot judge pain from the surface. He must have been extremely hurt. If Mo Xiao was here that year, he would have been able to keep Irania's life. Alas, fate toyed with man. To hear Mo Xiao say these words, she wondered how much remorse he must be feeling. How lovelorn Mo Xiao had been. How sad he also had been. Before their eyes Yueling flowers drifted further away in the wind like falling stars. A burst of flowers flew past and was gone in the blink of an eye, exactly as those words live in a moment, die in the next. Su Moi took the lead to rise and said, "Let's go." Feng Zhu also rose and straightened her skirt. When she raised her head, she suddenly froze under the dying twilight of Yueling flowers. A moment ago she did not pay too much attention when she was lying on the grass. At this time when she stood up, she was surprised to find that although Su Moi's face was obscured by the ornate mask, the exposed strands of hair were still a silver color of the moonlight. Out of the blue a thought entered her head like a thunderbolt. A long while later, in the faint glow resembling early dawn mist, she suddenly advanced in front of the purple-robed man and tremblingly raised her hand to his face. The mask fell away. The flowers' throbbing light spread onto the trees, the grass, and the two of them. In the pulsating light field, Feng Zhu hoarsely voiced, "Lord's eyes." When he didn't respond, she asked again, "Why did you lie to me?" The young man caught his slipping mask with one hand and lightly replied, "I never said I was your teacher, Mr. Mo." End of chapter 4.